prefer that. But in my early 20s, that was how we did them. Like, that's how we ate mushrooms. We would get naked and we would dance around in the woods like little fairies and gnomes and shit. And like that's how we did our mushrooms. And it was... Hello, my friends of the Psychedelic Renaissance. It's Tom Hatsis, psychedelic historian, coming to you with episode 2 of the Psanctum Oddcast. Today's guest is psychedelic magician Julian Vayne. Vayne is the author or co-author of 14 books, that's a lot, in such diverse areas of study as psychogeography, tarot, and psychedelic magic. He also hosts the My Magical Things podcast and runs the Blog of Baphomet. If you enjoy this podcast and would like to help support our mission, please consider making a one-time tax-deductible donation at psanctum.org. Or you can check out other options on patreon.com/sanctumpsychedelia. And now, let's get weird. So one thing that I had mentioned I'd wanted to ask you for a while now. I had heard you on another podcast, and you were talking about releasing a sigil where you use like charcoal or something to like draw the sigil on your body, and then you dance it off. I loved that, and I ordered Getting Higher, and it actually has not made it to my house yet. So my guess is that 5 minutes after we end our discussion, I'm going to get a notification from the post office saying, oh, you have a package there. So I was just curious, was that sigil release, is that yours, or did you come up with that, or did you hear that, and like, how did that come about?
Okay, so briefly, I suppose, yeah, it seems to me fairly obvious in a way as a technique, because obviously when people work with sigils, typically there's that process of once they're formulated, imbuing them with energy in some fashion and releasing them, and to be able to write something on your body, to draw something on your body, and to sweat that off on the dance floor. Certainly, a practice that I've done. I think I might have kind of come up with it, but I'm sure loads of other people have done kind of similar things. Certainly, if you look at the way that the Temple of Psychic Youth and those people were kind of experimenting with sigilization, dance culture, all that sort of stuff, I'm sure those guys would have done it. Yeah.
Sure. Okay, so it might be one of those things where it's like sometimes you think of a joke and then you see like a meme out there that has your joke, and it's like, oh, you stole my joke. It's like, well, no, they probably just thought of the same joke.
I guess if you think of something like the way that in sort of voodoo practice, you have the sort of veves that are drawn on the floor in flour, for example, or sigils that have been written on the ground in chalk, and then those are danced over so that those become obliterated or released, depending on the language you want to kind of favor. And I know one of the magical networks I'm involved with, the Luminous Thanateros, they did a whole series of stuff back in the day, in the 90s, in a big kind of gay club in London, which was all a whole bunch of work to do with working to find cures, medicine, support for the whole HIV virus thing, when that was all starting to happen. And the technique that they had was they used this big club, they had the buy-in of all the people who were running the show. So they would smudge people as they kind of came in, and they would use a special track with a sort of a sigil kind of embedded in the audio. And at kind of 3 a.m. in the morning, this whole bunch of people wearing robes would pile onto the dance floor. And then earlier on in the event, what they would have done would be to have drawn sigils out on the floor. So you had the whole vibe of the club and the whole kind of energy being orientated towards that point. And then at about 3 a.m., the guys would come in. They'd do some kind of like crazy dancing in the middle of it, and everyone would just go, this is weird but really good, and then they would leave. And that was been one of the things I guess would have fed into my thoughts about it.
That's awesome, though. Well, one of my philosophies with magic is, the weirder the better. I think that we're supposed to be expressing not exactly like a weird side, but maybe more of our shadow sides, obviously, at some points, and more of breaking free of societal strictures. I've always felt like that was a very big part of magic, is that you have to step out of like the bounds, in a sense, and kind of ride that hedge, as Hans Peter Durr referred to it, between the waking realm and the waking realm, and the dream realm. And no, that's such a fascinating idea, and that they got so many people in on it. to do it is really cool. I'm thinking I might need to set something up like that myself once we're all allowed to see each other and not be so socially distanced anymore, because that's just great.
I mean, I guess one of the things for me is that, and I've written about this, and I know it's kind of probably common culture for us, is that raves are psychedelic rituals by and large. Some of them may be more kind of consciously structured in that way, but nevertheless, this idea of like meeting communally, usually with a phenethylamine kind of medicine in you, which is going to be something that engenders so pro-social kind of activity and a sense of kind of group sort of cohesion, and then to take that energy, whether we do it sort of as just individually with the sigil that we're sweating off into the dance floor, into the music, and maybe we're chanting, and certainly if we do this stuff collectively, this is like, I often think Western culture, when MDMA kind of came in to our communities, we responded in a way that is completely intelligible from the point of view of like the way that a culture can learn to use a psychedelic. So we created like chill out rooms, we created the intense dance floor, we began to understand things like harm minimization with the thing, support, like how do you do the entry, how do you do the gentle art of coming down, and because this is like, I think you and I would probably both see this, it's like this is a human activity, it's a deeply human activity, so we reinvent these things that, and I remember kind of eventually going to a peyote circle and listening to the drum beat and thinking, oh, this is kicking, this is amazing, because it's just like dum, 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 dum. It's hardcore,
Yeah.
And again, that's like a 19th century 20th century kind of adaptation of the peyote coming into those communities using it to heal. I think there's a really interesting kind of way of looking at this in terms of, certainly in Britain, there's kind of, I think, a really interesting storyline that you can draw from with the Second Summer of Love in kind of 88, 89, and also the huge kind of social and political repression that was going on during the era of Margaret Thatcher.
Yeah.
And the fact that this was a community attempting to heal itself with a medicine which was very, very beneficial from a collective communal standpoint.
Absolutely. So let me ask you this though, because you raised a really good point. Excuse me. You raised a really good point that from a magical perspective, I kind of want to unpack, because I could see raves as well as psychedelic rituals in a sense, but in the example you're talking about, where we're talking about with the gay club and doing that whole thing, because everybody has that intention. What happens if we have a rave and it's like you have people that come in and they don't want anything to do with that intent, whatever that intention might be, or they come in with entities or something, like how could that throw off the intention? Or is there like enough of a wave of people, let me rephrase this. I apologize. I'm still new to this. I'm still new to doing podcasts. What I mean is, like, if you have so this idea of like a rave, we're all getting together to listen to music and dance and bring the energy up, whatever that might mean to you or me. We're coming here collectively to do this. And that for me is like, yeah, that you have that magical ritual there, something maybe akin to the rites of Eleusis or the rites of Ceres or whatever in the ancient world. And but then you have some people, like I'm from New York originally. I live in Portland now, Portland, Oregon. But in New York, they were called the BTS, which was the Brooklyn Terror Squad. And they would literally just go to raves and just like harm people, And it's like, what do we do? Like as magicians, what do we do with that kind of, when that kind of energy enters the space? What do we do with that?
Well, in the example that I was giving, the people who were organizing the club were on side as well.
Oh,
So
yeah,
that means the security are on side,
sure.
the DJ, all of that kind of thing. And I think that that's something that you have to, that if you're going to do a communal ceremony of any description, you don't want the people who are going to be disruptive in that. And so there has to be like a gatekeeping function of some description.
Got it.
And I think, it's hugely variable, but I think that the broader idea that For most people, those who are not like actively out to do bad stuff, you know, for most people, there is a deeply ceremonial kind of element in this. I remember being in Goa in like, I don't know, man, like 96 or something, and Goa Gill was playing, and he started it with, you know, the classic sort of Jim Morrison Doors line about, is everybody in? Is everybody in? The ceremony is about to begin. And it was. And okay, you've got people from all different nations, all different stuff they're bringing there. Some people are going, you know, for all sorts of reasons, but even that reason of I want to have a good time, this idea of recreation, this idea of kind of creating ourselves anew through ecstasy, through joy, that in and of itself, I think, is really valuable. I mean, I don't know. I mean, how do you feel about the relationship between this idea of like, it's an interesting thing within the kind of psychedelic field, because people talk about, oh, there's recreational use and then there's kind of, you know, spiritual use or whatever. How does that feel for you, that kind of territory?
You know, I addressed that in my book, Psychedelic Mystery Traditions, and I think that we're on the same page with that, because I think that a certain amount of collective reverence, even if it's recreational, has a spiritual component to it, because there's that community there, even if people are just connecting to each other. I've always felt that I think that we sometimes draw too hard of a line between the two. But like in my early 20s, my friends and I, again, I'm from New York, we would go up to Lake George and we'd build this big bonfire on the beach, and we'd have drums and guitars and eat mushrooms, and we'd get naked and we'd dance around. And it's like, yeah, that was recreational, but there was certainly even if it's a vague, but some kind of spiritually uplifting element to the whole thing. I mean, you felt great afterward, you know? So even, I mean, usually when I take mushrooms or any entheogenic plant or fungus, like I like to, you know, do the deep Terence McKenna. I don't really prefer the word hero dose. It sounds a little pretentious to me, but a high dose, I prefer that. But in my early 20s, that was how we did them. Like, that's how we ate mushrooms. We would get naked and we would dance around in the woods like little fairies and gnomes and shit. And like that's how we did our mushrooms. And it was totally a spiritual thing for me. And like, you know, I think mystical experiences are good for people. I think ecstatic experience is good, you know. What?
Yeah, man, that's totally it. Just totally in agreement with you. I mean, it's a bit like you know, that thing in The Charge of the Goddess in the kind of, you know, Alexandrian Gardnerian Wiccan kind of stream, where it talks about mirth and reverence. These things can go together, you know, absolutely. And I think that one of the things that we can see, you know, the reason that people go to ayahuasca ceremonies like more than a couple of times, unless they're kind of going specifically because they're dealing with like some stuff, people go there because they have a good time. People go there because they enjoy that experience. You know, people seek that out. Same with the peyote circle, same with lots of these things. There is, you know, we talk about like the work and like going down into the, you know, the unconscious or whatever we want to do, and like dredging up all the stuff and
The shadow work.
the shadow work.
Yeah.
And it has to be said that it can be incredibly beautiful and joyous and blissful, and that is a healing as well. I remember working with someone on a one-to-one basis in a session, and they'd come for me to work with them, and they were having all kinds of issues with you know, lots of very difficult family background, lots of very difficult kind of anxieties and stuff going on for them. And actually what the mushrooms did as the teacher, I said, well, you know, we don't know how this is going to work. You know, speak to the mushrooms as you would a trusted advisor and friend, go into the experience. And I remember them popping out of the eye shades and the headphones for a little while at one stage and going, I feel kind of bad because I'm having a really, really nice time. This is this deeply beautiful experience. And I said, well, that, you know, maybe that's what the teacher would like to give you now, you know? Like, you've come in with all this difficult stuff. You're expecting to go through hell and through the, you know, the abyss and all this kind of thing. And actually the mushrooms are going, hey, it's beautiful and amazing. And this is life and this is how it is. And that was a great healing teaching for that person.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, with the idea of there being mirth and merriment, I mean, like even Christians have that. When you were saying that, I was thinking of, I believe it's Luke 12, eat, drink, and be merry. And so, I mean, it's even in the Bible. So we are supposed to be doing these things with the group session. And I'm a bit of a little different with the group session. I'm not big on group sessions at all. Like when I want to sit with the medicine, like I want it to just be Gaia and me. And just like I eat the medicine, I'm in council with the goddess, and it's just us. And some people are terrified by that, and they also prefer that group, as you were saying. I've done group sessions before, but for me, they're just not how I prefer to do it, really. And I think there's that difference, getting back to what we were saying with the whole merriment thing. Aldous Huxley called those gratuitous graces. Like they're not the full-blown mystical. There's the full-blown mystical experience where, you know, you eat 5 grams of mushroom, blindfold on, you know, you lay back and just, you know, talk to the gods. And then there's those gratuitous graces where, you know, it's just like, yo, life is beautiful. Like, have fun with this. Like, it's okay to just be yourself for these moments and enjoy these hours. And you don't have to think about all your responsibilities or think, am I doing the great work? Am I doing the deep work? Am I, you know, unweaving enough of my shadow with this? No, just sometimes sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride. Like, that's okay too. That's fine, you know?
Yeah, there's that bit, isn't there, where Huxley is looking down at his, well, I think in the book it's grey flannel trousers, although I understand from Mike Jay's work that it was actually a pair of jeans, and that his wife suggested that they should change them for grey flannels because that was more sort of authentically Huxley.
Yeah.
And he's looking at this thing and going, this is amazing. My trousers are completely amazing and astonishing. And it's as though I'd never seen them before.
Yeah.
Like, I guess just thinking about your practice, what you've described thus far is you said, I used to do it in this way with my friends and the fire and blah, and now I'm doing it this way. I guess perhaps for both of us, like 10 years time, we might be doing it in a different way again, or there might be other things that kind of come up, different processes that we want to go through. And for me, I suppose it's about, I like the kind of the flexibility. And the lovely thing about psychedelics is that because you can, once you're familiar with the territory a little bit, and you can kind of work with dosage ranges, and you can work with context. So you can have anything from the kind of you know, low dose experience of, let's say, psilocybin, for example, walking in the woodland, you know, walking in a beautiful place, like, you know, having that kind of nature connection, whether it's alone or with like a friend or whatever. You can do that thing of folding the medicine back in on itself and going down into the deep mind and into those kinds of processes. You can have, I mean, quite a lot of my work has been like relatively small group magical work, with using a variety of different dosage ranges depending on what the ritual system kind of requires. And certainly even, I think, fairly, to use perhaps an inappropriate term, sober forms of ritual, a small amount of a psychedelic. I mean, I've just finished reading Chris Bennett's work, Liber 420,
Yeah.
which is totally awesome. I just love it. It's great. And you can see, I mean, I've done Masonic ritual, and I can see how, like, if you put you know, even a relatively small amount of, say, cannabis into the mix, it would be an incredibly intense experience. Just that little additional bit of opening, and, you know, the initiation ritual, so the entered apprentice thing, where, you know, the blindfold is removed and there's this kind of opulent, amazing, you know, black and white floor. There's the grand dude in his chair and all this stuff going on, you know. Yeah. So even just like a tiny trace amount, I think sometimes could be useful depending on the nature of the practice.
Oh, absolutely. And I've often said to people, I sometimes get mistaken, and perhaps you deal with this as well, but people think that I reduce magic just to psychedelics. And I'm like, no, like magic exists with or without a psychedelic. I mean, it enhances the psychedelic, or excuse me, it enhances the magic in the same way I use sometimes like sports analogies, even though I'm not a sports person at all. But it's like, look, baseball does not require people drinking beer in the stands. But people drinking beer in the stands kind of makes baseball a little bit more, I mean, I find it very boring in totality, even with people drinking beer in the stands. Sorry to all the baseball fans out there. It's not my sport. But you know what I'm saying? It's just like, take all the audience out take the beer out, take the people sitting at home watching on TV, smoking bongs, take all that out of the equation, baseball still exists. So I think of magic in a similar way. Take everything out of it, take the little bit of cannabis out of it, or take the 5 grams of mushrooms out of it, or whatever. Magic still exists, and you can do these rituals and they'll still have effect with or without the psychedelic. I just find it's easier with the medicine to reach those places because it is, quite frankly.
It's horses for courses, isn't it, to some extent? Like, I've got like one of my closest magical collaborators doesn't use anything stronger than black tea. Like, that's, he and I come, get together, we drink some tea, we go and do some magic, we do like all kinds of different practices. And for him, psychedelics, they're not his bag for a variety of different reasons. He's a very, very accomplished and very successful, in a variety of senses, magical practitioner. I think that probably, I mean, I'm guessing this, but maybe we can kind of talk about this, that magic frequently requires what you pointed out earlier on, which is the weirdness. It requires an alteration in your normal orientation towards the world, and that includes the inner world, the self and stuff as well. So like an altered state of awareness, what in chaos magic is obviously referred to as gnosis, but that altered state, however it's arrived at, whether that's through breath work, drumming, dancing, sex, protracted periods of darkness, we can list all the stuff, that changing awareness and that changing consciousness seems to me to be pretty critical to a way that a lot of these processes work.
Sure. And you mentioned chaos magic. Do you consider yourself primarily a chaos magician?
Yes, from a pragmatic point of view, in terms of like the magical systems that I use are kind of highly eclectic. My backstory and lineage is initially through Wicca, but even with that, with quite kind of eclectic coven groups, I think that there's sometimes for people who are sort of maybe who are entering this arena of human experience, or kind of on the outside of it at the moment, you can kind of look in and you sort of say, oh, well, these people do these things and these people do this other stuff. And actually, when you get down to it, the practitioners and the way things are done in ritual and done in ceremony is a lot more kind of flexible and a lot more fluid. So I think of myself as a chaos magician in the sense that I like kind of I like an eclectic, wide-ranging bunch of spiritual traditions to draw from. But actually, to be honest, like, that's pretty common now. It wasn't so common, say, in Britain in the 1970s, late 1970s, when the approach was developing, because I think then the people who were involved in the early days of the chaos current, they kind of looked at, okay, you've got Wicca over here, which with its duo-theology and its way of doing things, kind of earth-based spirituality mashed up with masonry and being sky-clad and stuff, and that's cool. And then you've got like the whole sort of OTO thelemic styles of magic, which is also within a kind of a sort of a theological, revealed religious envelope. And what they wanted was something that kind of sat outside of a particular religious doctrine. And in some respects, chaos magic, although it kind of claims to postmodernity, it's quite modernist in the sense that it kind of goes and says, well, there's probably underlying kind of structures in all this stuff. We can tease these things out, and we can create, going back to Huxley, a kind of perennial wisdom in a way.
Yeah.
We can start to kind of go, okay, so the Greek Orthodox dudes, they do their ceremony like this. So there's the cultural vocabulary, but then there's the practice. What does it look like? Okay, so it looks like chanting and singing and burning incense, and so it looks like this set of physical behaviors. So I'm really interested in technique. I'm really interested in, like, okay, you can tell me the special names you have for stuff, and you can tell me like the complex metaphysic you have for how the world works, but what is it you actually do? And I guess that's what it comes down to, this thing about what you're saying about psychedelics, that the interesting thing about psychedelics, you can say, well, what we're going to do, guys, is this. We're going to, this substance will allow us to kind of have access to this other state of awareness. So it's a very clear technology of altering awareness, and it's alchemical in the sense that it's a physical stuff. It can be bought, sold, traded, bad stuff. It's a physical material, and so to transform that that kind of led that solidity into the gold of a magical insight or a great ritual or a great teaching or whatever. That's really appealing to me. It's very coherent. It can be pointed at, and
Yeah.
that's nice.
Yeah, no, it absolutely. There's I have like a weird relationship, I guess, with the term chaos magic, and I think you kind of hit on a lot of what it is that. Hold on a sec, I gotta close this window. There's a very loud truck right outside. Sorry, Chris, I gotta close this one sec. And Susan leaves. Sorry, my cat just gave me this look like, why are you closing my window? She, this is her little palace area, so she's a little upset with me right now. I love you, Chris. Sorry. Anyway, yeah, I had dated a chaos magician once, and she went like all the way with it, to the point where, and I don't know if this is indicative of all chaos magic, but like she, like, since belief was so important, she never corrected anything that didn't jive, like I mean, just like facts about the world, like to use a very mild example, if you were to say the sky is blue, well, if she needed the sky to be red in order for her belief system to operate, it's like, nope, the sky is red. And it's like, well, I mean, we have to be able to, I don't know, like incorporate some facts into what we're doing. And again, I don't know if that's a total chaos magic thing or just, this one person thing. But it always struck me as a little, I don't know, I guess interesting to say the very least, of how important the actual belief is. And I'm certainly on board with that. I mean, your belief and the symbols you use is what creates your power. And I think that's where chaos magic has a lot of good in it, in that sense. And as far as using psychedelics, sorry, I got all kind of messed up with the loud truck outside. Do you think that there are specific medicines used for specific purposes? And let me give a quick example of what I'm talking about. So MDMA is, the happy, oh, I love everybody kind of substance. Whereas what I find, I use MDMA a lot for shadow work, to go really deep inside and pull that stuff out. And sometimes I'll say that to friends of mine, and they're like, you're using MDMA for shadow work? Like, really? And I'm curious what your thoughts are, if you've ever come across something like that, or if you think things like work better if they're set for, a specific purpose. And before you answer, I'm just going to open the window one more time.
Sure.
Sorry, Chris, send me. There you go, little girl. Okay, sorry about that. I'm so professional, aren't I?
I'm just slightly disappointed I can't see the cat, to be honest, Tom. But I mean,
she's so cute. Hold on one second.
Yeah. Show me the cat person. Where is she? Oh, hello, baby.
Say hi. This is your friend Julian Vayne. Say hi.
Hi. Good pillow by the window. Good spot.
Yeah,
I mean, it must have been tricky having a girlfriend who was of that sort of mind. I mean, I suppose this is where we can almost maybe go back to this and talk about like the whole postmodern thing generally. Yeah, I mean, people have truth claims. We need to look at the validity of those things. People often take refuge in this notion of nothing is true and everything is permitted. Yeah. That's a koan, right? That's a koan. Apart from anything else, the statement "nothing is true" is a statement about the nature. I mean, exactly. It's blindingly obvious that it's actually pointing at this thing about looking at how, the world is definitely perspectival. There's definitely different kinds of like data and information. We can, I think, for me, I'm totally happy to ditch the kind of what I suppose you call the extreme postmodern view that something like, I don't know, your till receipt is as much a valuable cultural artifact as the Mona Lisa. No, it's not. Yeah. Frankly, that's nonsense.
Yeah, thank you. Because I'm. Let me just say real quick, like I am almost anti-postmodernism.
Yeah. And that's the reason I hesitate about the chaos magic thing, because I like to think that I can see there being the emergence of a kind of, this is a movement in philosophy, metamodernism. yeah, which is kind of this movement in philosophy, which is about having the multiplicity of viewpoint that postmodernity points to, but nevertheless still having like a teleology, still having a project, still having a like, and this is what we think. So this kind of idea of
Grounding.
having a kind of a wry cynicism, but knowing that finally you have to make a choice.
Yes.
And even not making a choice is a choice. And so so I would like to see an emerging magic, a kind of meta-modern or chaos magic 2.0, where we did various things. And one of the things that we did is we admitted to the fact that we have a project in the world, whether we make that as broad as of a great work or illumination or whatever it happens to be. Like there's political stuff that I think is good and political stuff I think is bad, but basically to simplify. Yeah. And also what we should do is we should be much better at citing our sources. So if you take, say, Pete Carroll's book, Liber Null, it's a great book in many respects, and I know Pete Carroll personally. We used to sort of go, I used to live down the road from him. We'd go out to the pub and stuff. And it's a great book, and it was written when he was, a relatively young man. It's brilliant, but it's hugely derivative, and it doesn't admit to any of the influences. It kind of, it pops out of Zeus's head fully formed, it would seem, and it's like, no, guy, that's not how it works actually. And it's much more respectful, and it's much more honest to say, look, my influences, I can tell you what my influences are, and I do my best when I quote other people's work to cite who I'm talking about, because otherwise, how can you make any judgment about the stuff I'm saying? Like, how is that meaningful? You have to kind of do this. So that's the reason I think that the postmodern thing for me is like we've got to get, and we are getting beyond that. If people who are watching this haven't checked it out, then go and have a look at like metamodernism. It's a term that's been kicking around for a few years now, but it's starting to become a really interesting philosophical movement. Go on, back to you.
No, I was going to say that I don't, and I'm going to just stick with postmodernism for a second. I don't see how that could even be satisfying, like just as a worldview or philosophy. And like I do, I write history, as you know, and postmodernist history is, it's really just garbage. I read an article recently written by a postmodernist historian about how there weren't medieval flying ointments, and the jumping jacks. I know it was ridiculous. It was like, oh my God, like the jumping jacks that this guy was doing just to like make this point because he doesn't want there to have been these flying ointments. And it was just like, I was like blown away. Like I like had to walk away from the article. Like Eden is looking at me, and like she could see the steam coming out of my ears. She's like, "You're reading postmodernist history." Like she knows, because it was just like, and that's the thing I don't like is like, so when I was writing The Witch's Ointment, I changed it took me almost 10 years to write it. I changed my mind several times because new information came to light. And in fact, even after the book came out, I wrote a follow-up to it called Psychedelic Mystery Traditions, where I literally said in one of the chapters, oh, here's everything I got wrong in The Witch's Ointment that I realized is incorrect. And it's just like, what is it about people that, like postmodernists in particular, that they just like, is it their inability to deal with scientific method? Are they just not that smart? Like, what is it that, like, not to be a dick, but I'm just curious, like, can you really just not handle like the STEM fields? Like, is that what this is? I can't either, but I at least try by using methodology, so I don't come off as being full of shit. Like you said, like, I want to know, like, where are you getting this from? Did Nikki Weird say to do this, or did Ronald McDonald say to do this? That makes a big difference to me.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And there are so many things to come from that. One of them, I guess, would be if you look at the work of Michel Foucault, for example, and you look at the history of sexuality. Those two volumes are fantastic. Discipline and Punish, really, really amazing. And what he's actually doing is he's giving. And this was part of the important postmodern project of the kind of 1960s and onwards, was to give voice to people who did not have a voice. That was the point. That was an important part of it.
And that's good.
And there was a radical iconoclastic element to it. So if you look at is it Baudrillard's essay, The Gulf War Never Happened? Now, that essay, the reason it has this kind of quote at the title that makes you go, but hang on, it did happen. The point about the essay is that the title is a reference to another text, and it's also about how it wasn't a war, it was basically the annihilation of a state by another state. That's the point he's trying to make. He's not saying there was no Gulf War. That's not actually, and so confusing the shock tactic of attempting to give voice to a new discourse with the idea of just saying, well, none of this is really real, is it? It's all just kind of, it's all discussion. That's the kind of nonsense that leads to the whole, 5G coronavirus. Bill Gates is going to kind of give you a micro. God knows why. I mean, I've got a mobile phone I carry with me. I'm trackable all the time anyhow.
Yeah.
But this idea that there are not better or worse sources of information, and there are not, as you pointed to, better or worse ways of mining a set of information, of researching a piece of information. Historia is not fabula. It's not the same thing. It's a different entity,
Yeah.
and it's important to be able to see a distinction between those things, I think.
Yeah, I this actually came up just about a month ago, maybe 2 months ago or so. But a friend of mine and I happen to have a lot of love and respect for this person, but he teeters on the postmodernist side of things. And he had asked me, he's like, well, not so many words. Well, what makes your history correct and mine incorrect? And I said, because your methods open the door to Holocaust denial. Mine do not. Like, with using your methods, using postmodernist history, you can argue that there was no Holocaust. Hitler was just a swell guy, and everything was hunky-dory in Germany in the 1930s. It's like, well, that, now I don't know of any postmodernists that would do something that ridiculous, but the point is that the methods or lack of the idea of not having methods could lead to something like that. It could lead to saying that, people haven't been oppressed here or there, and, we just made that up. And it's like, no, people have been oppressed, and we need to correct that and make sure that doesn't happen again, and they're extreme examples I'm giving, but I think when you're dealing with a postmodernist, you just kind of have to like smack them with facts across the face so they'll keep going.
Yeah. And you look at kind of Trump and a variety of governments actually on both your side of the pond and here and elsewhere, and this kind of notion of the post-truth, and like it doesn't really matter. It's just a story, whatever. There is still truth claims. There's still truth value. There's still value in doing proper research into things, and there is knowledge. Otherwise, if there is no, how can one know a thing if there is no kind of value in the difference between falsity, part falsity, and truth? Like how is knowledge, how is data able to turn into information that actually informs you to act in the world? Because if in the case of the current pandemic, if you just absorb all that sort of information, what's also really telling about it is that it leads to a kind of paralysis beyond people posting on Facebook or wherever about like, isn't this terrible? No one does anything. No one acts. No one resists. Exactly. And the thing is, the interesting thing about the history of postmodernism as a philosophical idea, which is rooted very much in the fact that Foucault serves up his philosophy through the lens of history much of the time, is that there is a history. You can look back at how this discourse, how this set of ideas was being used. For example, in History of Sexuality, where Foucault, as a gay man, is writing all about how the construction of notions of homosexuality as a particular preference or condition, even in the Victorian era. So what he's trying to do is he's actually trying to give voice to a new way of understanding something in order to unpick power structures. That's a massively different project from just uncritically absorbing everything and then hashtag I'm terribly confused about the pandemic or whatever.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's one of the things that I often also say with Google, I think is part of that. In that I don't think Google is a bad thing. Look, I use Google. I think it's awesome. But I think too often people see Googling their opinion as the ending point, and it's really the starting point. Like, that's where you begin, and you shouldn't begin with Googling your opinion. You should begin with Googling the opposite of your opinion, and then work from there. One thing, if I could say real quick, I used to teach at a small community college just outside of Portland, and the first assignment for my class was always, you have to write 2-3 pages, doesn't matter. I wasn't big on page count. 2-3 pages, whatever, something that you truly believe in, whether it's a religious thing, a philosophy, a government a figure, or a historical figure, whatever, just something you believe in, you know to be true. The second assignment was prove that all wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that what happens is that one of the behaviors that perhaps the kind of access to information that we have with the internet really, even if it doesn't necessarily foster it, inadvertently colludes with, in terms of the way people use this stuff, is you hit the first answer, that's the answer. You hit the most popular, that must be the answer. This must be what's going on. Crazed individuals like David Icke spitting a bunch of, like, you know, racist nonsense.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, but he's got like 5 million hits, therefore there must be something in it. No, that doesn't mean nothing. It means nothing at all. You know,
McDonald's sells 5 million hamburgers a day. I'm still not going to eat a single one of them.
Yeah, man, exactly.
Yeah, and one of the problems that happens then is also, because I agree with you, and I want to piggyback off what you just said. So it's not just, so David Icke says this and 5 million people agree with it, but I've now just posted it to Facebook, and all my friends are agreeing with it, because they, you know, they don't know anything either. They don't know any more than I know, which is infinitely probably more than what David Icke knows, which is not saying not much at all, but still probably more. And so you get that reinforcement of, oh, these 5 million people said it. This all came up on Google. All my friends agree with me. I'm a scholar. And it's just like, no, you're actually like, you're at -20. You're not even at 0. Like, we have to like work real hard to get you to 0 and dig up all that bullshit first. And then we could start, you know, layering some truth on top of what claims you're making. But nobody wants to take that time, because it's way easier to just have all your friends agree with you on social media. And that means that you know what you're talking about. And it's like, I don't think so.
So a lot of my professional work, you know, to be talking about the places we worked. I work in museums and galleries, and so I would give an example of the emergence of, depending on exactly the context, but like the kind of Renaissance thinking, something like this. You know, the Renaissance period, where you start to get the emergence, the very early emergence of what later on in history we would call kind of, you know, things like natural philosophy, the scientific project, Popperian science, and so on. And so I would give an example. I would say, if you wanted to know how many teeth a horse has got, under the previous system, what you would do is you would go to scholarship, you would go to biblical text. Ideally, you would go to the Bible. You would go through the Bible, trying to find out, you know, how many teeth has a horse got. Or you might, if you know, as we hit the Renaissance, you might conceivably go to kind of the re-emerging or re-encountering of the kind of classical sources. You know, how many legs has a spider? How many legs has a spider got? Well, let's ask Aristotle. Let's see what he says, which is obviously, as you know, an interesting example. And then, so I would give this example and then say, well, actually, under the scientific method, under the kind of, you know, the natural philosophy side of things, you would say, well, actually, I go to the book of nature, and I go to the book that God has written, and I find a horse or the skull of a horse, and I count the number of teeth, and that's how I discover it. And I used to use this analogy for a little while, until eventually what started happening is people would say, well, I just Google it. I just like put how many teeth has a horse got into Google, hit search, and I'd find out. And I started to kind of say, now that's cool, because in principle, that should be a collection of data which includes accounts of people who've gone out and counted the numbers of teeth that a horse might have. However, you now have the issue of filtering and sifting the data. You know, I mean, like, like I do quite a lot of kind of online mentoring for people, particularly people who are sort of like magical practitioners who are maybe kind of, you know, solitary practitioners. And one of the interesting things that I notice is that with the younger people that I speak with, so I'm 51, I got into like magic stuff like when I was a kid, basically. But a lot of the younger people, what they have is the problem I had, or the challenge that I had, was that there was the occult stuff in the local library in my relatively small provincial town, and then eventually what I learned I could order from interlibrary loan. That was it. That was the stuff I had, and then people. What they have is they have this huge kind of Metze smorgasbord, unwieldy set of things. And again, like the example of the postmodern thing and the coronavirus, often it ends up with people going, I don't know what to do. I've no idea. I've got like these, you know, 10,000 voices telling me different stuff, and to try and kind of cut a path through this is incredibly difficult. So we drown in the data, and it becomes hard to turn it into information.
Yeah, I agree with that totally. I write about that in my book Microdosing Magic. One of the spells is actually called the Witch's Kitty, and it's about dealing with that overabundance of data and bullshit. And I agree that it's like, look, again, Google is really awesome that you could put into a search how many teeth does a horse have, but just make sure that that person that you're reading is one of those people that went and looked at a horse's skull first. You know, they're not just, you know, making it up or saying, oh, well, it doesn't matter how many teeth a horse has, so I'm going to say they have a billion teeth or whatever, you know. It's tricky, and we have to be able to. Sorry, what were you going to say?
No. I was just going to just echo that and say one of the things I remember, and I still do this. They're teenagers now, so hopefully they're doing the thing themselves. But when my kids were little, if they presented me with a story that they'd kind of, you know, learned on the internet or piece of information or whatever, and particularly if it's something that I felt was kind of slightly questionable or was contentious in some way, I would say, who does this story serve? Yeah, who benefits from this narrative that you're giving me now, and who benefits from you effectively now transferring the narrative from your mind to my mind? Like, who gets something out of this? It's just a question. Sometimes the answer may be very little, it may be a very kind of abstract piece of information or whatever, and sometimes if it's something that's perhaps more contentious, more political, more social, you can say, well, yeah, that's interesting. If that were the case, or if this narrative perhaps were not true, who might it benefit and what might be its effects in the world? Because there is also kind of project with these ideas, with these narratives that are put in. You know, I had to pick up a member of my family, like today, in fact, very gently and thoughtfully, I like to think, on Facebook, who published a thing which was like oh, these strange silver cylinders. The kids are taking these, they're breathing in these strange silver cylinders and the gas from them, and they're getting what was it, air bubbles in their blood, and that's killing them. And I very gently said, well, these are nitrous oxide cylinders, and if you're going to put information about nitrous oxide, you might want a slightly better piece of harm minimization than something that talks about how breathing something in is going to create like these air bubbles in your blood. I mean, a fascinating physiological thing to happen,
Yeah, sure.
given what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So you just have to kind of stop and go, right, so here's the information I'm going to post or I'm going to express to another person. Is this my personal lived-in narrative that I've learnt from? You know, it's back to, is it Plato asking about whether he's, you know, the news that he's going to get, whether or not it's kind of come directly from the source. You'll know the anecdote better than I do. Or is this kind of secondhand from someone else? And who does it serve if you pass this on? You know, and what does it do? What's its effect in the world? If it's, as a magician, these words we make are spells. Yeah, they are in a literal, exactly. We know this in a kind of a literal sense. They're spells, they're incantations, they're enchantments of the world. Are they ours? Are they from some other actor who has an axe to grind? That perhaps if we actually looked at the thing a bit more closely, we'd go, that's not actually what I want to do. That's not the magic I want to weave in the world. That's perhaps unhelpful, or at least in the example that I've given, inaccurate.
Sure. Yeah. So I had just a question about a few items on your shelf up there.
Oh,
I
yeah, let's do the magical things.
Yeah, is that Shiva there?
Yeah, man. Yeah. From Nepal. Purchased while I was out there in 2011. I went out for 2 weeks uh, while I was kind of like doing full-time work, and I was with my dear friend Greg Humphreys, who's another artist magician, and we had 2 weeks. And so we said, look, we've got to meet the secret chiefs. Yeah, if you're going to go to the Himalayas, that's the mission, isn't it? You've got to meet the
Yeah.
secret chiefs. So we did. We successfully met the secret chiefs. I met an Agora Sadhu who I got to hang out with until he was too drunk, and then I had to take over his shtick for him because all the dudes from the village came up, and I was the fool with the tarot cards. But I do like Chillum, so that's fine.
That's
And my friend encountered the secret chief in the form of the Iranian trance DJ Beat Chop, I think he's called, as we kind of came down from this insane party in a jeep down through the Himalayas. And so that's Shiva, dancing the form of Shiva. So Shiva Nataraja, and yeah, one of my prized possessions.
that's awesome.
What have you got, Tom? What have you got?
Oh, Jesus.
I mean, man, the Amanita is the big thing, literally. I mean, tell me the story of the Amanita, man.
So this is my altar to Gaia. If I go down like that, you can see there's actually an altar piece there.
Uh-huh.
This whole
Cool.
thing is the actual altar. Because we take our altars very seriously in this house. That Amanita piece, that's actually a piñata. My singer from my old band and in X, back when I lived in New York, they made that for me for my 30th birthday. And I loved that more than I mean, if you shake it, you could still hear that there's actually a couple of blunts in there that they rolled blunts and put them in there. So if the apocalypse ever comes, I know I have at least 2 blunts that are like 10 years old in there. But yeah, I couldn't destroy it. Like they were about to like hoist it up on a string. I'm like, are you kidding? I'm like, I want this mushroom far more than I want whatever the hell's in there. There's weed in there. I'm like, I don't care. I have weed. I want this. You know? Yeah. So I've had that for about 10 years now. Yeah, 10 years.
Wow, that's a lovely thing. That's a lovely thing, particularly that idea that it's it's a fruit that has yet to fruit, and perhaps will never fruit. I mean, who knows?
Yeah.
Whatever. But that's delightful. That's a delightful thing. And I always I have to say, I always picture you with like the Amanita. I think you've got a variety of profile pictures and things knocking around on the internet of Tom in various ecstatic states, let's call it. It would seem, holding these things, cherishing these lovely Amanita. So it's just great to see, man. Great to see.
Yeah. The Amanita is one of the so there's 3 mushrooms around here that my partner and I go picking. The Amanita is one, another is Psilocybe azarescens, and the other is Psilocybe cyanescens.
Whoa.
Yeah, the good stuff. So they grow all on the coast in Oregon and in Washington. So come around September, October, we're going to be over there just madly picking mushrooms. Also some culinary mushrooms like chanterelles are out there. You can get some lobster mushrooms as well. So yeah, we go and we get all our mushrooms from the coast.
I tell you what, that's an interesting thing, because one of the things that I think that happens, particularly if you're interested in the whole kind of mycology stuff and plants and entheogens and all that kind of material, is that it brings you into a very deep relationship with the landscape. And I too go out. I mean, I'm near a big river down here, and I go and harvest samphire, so from the river, which is beautiful to eat. There's a lot of I do a fair amount of kind of wild food foraging. I find it really helpful. I think it's really it's fantastic to kind of go, oh, Gaia, the earth, blah, but then to actually kind of be able to identify. This is where we come back to the postmodern thing. Like, there's a world of difference between I don't know, your cow parsley and your water hemlock, and you can put your fingers in your ears and believe as much as you like about whether or not you believe that this one is in fact this one. Doesn't mean anything. You need to actually be able to identify what the plants are. You need to have like a good appreciation of that, and an appreciation beyond just the narrow confines of what's going to get me high, because also, like, what's my body going to be made from? If I can go and range out into the forest and I can find those beautiful edible mushrooms, then that's just like, there's so much like beautiful kind of connection in that, and that supports the practice in a whole variety of different ways. And it's important that you know the difference between the ones you can eat and the ones, Terry Pratchett, I think, says that all mushrooms are edible, but some of them are only once.
Yes, exactly. And there's something so addicting about foraging. Like, even like it's an addiction. And again, like, you know, not to keep shitting on the postmodernists, but it's like, this is a piece of humanity that you're missing out on, because you're just saying, oh, you're just picking indiscriminately and you don't care. And it's like, well, just make sure that is an Amanita muscari and not an Amanita phalloides, because one is psychoactive, the other will kill you. So, you know, and no amount of deconstruction is going to unkill you if you eat the wrong mushroom. And yeah, it's just like mystical experiences. Like, I think they're really good for people. I think foraging is good for people. You know, and there is that connection. You're right. Like, when my partner and I go out mushroom hunting, like, we do say adjurations to Gaia when we get there, but then we actually go do the work, and, you know, we also clean up the forest. Like, we'll do our adjurations, we'll clean up, actually reverse that. We first clean up the forest, then we do the adjurations, and then, you know, we pull the crap out, bless the land and ask Gaia for her blessings, and then go get the good stuff. It's like, we got the garbage out, now show us the mushrooms. And she always does.
And you know, we can look at that as a kind of mystical, parapsychological, magical phenomena, and we can also look at that as but what we're doing is we are bringing ourselves into really full attention with the place, and therefore we are more likely to spot these things. And it kind of doesn't really matter. I mean, the thing about magic is a placeholder for, we don't know how this works, or there are multiple ways of describing how this may conceivably work. But yeah, those sorts of processes, I mean, I've learned a lot from one of the things that I like about chaos magic and about the sort of meta modern magic, chaos magic 2.0, whatever we want to call it. For me, it's about like the immediacy of those the processes. You know, I've done things like Masonic ritual where you have to memorize a bunch of stuff and say it on command and rah rah rah. But I much prefer like something that's much more kind of flowing and immediate, and where it's kind of, you're just riffing off the situation and letting the words that are right arise in that moment. And one of the things I've noticed from working with, and there's not a good word for this, but I guess you'll got what I'm saying, like, you know, indigenous or tribal, or like, you know, other kind of communities that are outside the sort of Euro-American kind of bubble, is that there's a much, in many of those settings, I've observed a kind of way of being where this notional separation that certainly exists within kind of, you know, academic theory and various other areas of the sacred and the secular, kind of it destabilizes, it breaks down. So when I go out and I'm taking say the samphire from the mudflats down near the river, I say thank you. I don't necessarily make like a big deal about it. I don't necessarily use like a special word. I don't call the river anything beyond its name that I know it by. And river, you know, I could give it the special goddess name or whatever if I wanted to. That would be cool. But it's the kind of the honesty and the authenticity that I've observed in other cultures that I try and cultivate myself, where I take something from the tree, I take the, you know, the what have we got now? The elderflowers are starting to just kind of been happening here. So, you know, you can make amazing cordial from them, you can fry them, you can use them medicinally, blah, blah, blah. When I take them, I just say thank you to the tree. I take a moment and I appreciate that, you know, and cultivating that connection, it seems to me to be what it's all about.
No, I agree. And we're at the top of the hour, believe it or not. So we could leave it there, because that's a great way to end. Or if you have anything else you'd like to add, I mean, more than happy to keep going.
I don't know. Have you got other stuff on your list that you wanted to chat about? I mean,
there was no list.
No list.
The only thing I knew I was going to ask you about was the sigil thing at the beginning, because I knew I wanted to, like, I've been wanting to ask you that, and I was going to ask you over, Facebook Messenger. I'm like, no, let's just, like, that'll be the kickoff question for when Julian's on the Oddcast. So, that was the only one I had. I mean, we went into some really awesome places, though. Like, no, like, that was really amazing.
I think what's interesting about the conversation that we've had, Tom, which is really interesting, is that as magical practitioners, we could spend our time talking about, like, this is how we draw the circle, or this is how we connect with the directions, or all that kind of stuff. But I think what's probably more important, and I hope has kind of come out of this conversation, is that there are these kind of underlying structures and values and ideas, like connection, like authenticity, like practice, all these things kind of coming out, which all of the data, all the froth, all the kind of, the style of robe you might have, or the style of robe I might have, that's immaterial. That doesn't really matter. All that, those things, like your Amanita and my Shiva, they point at these underlying processes. And yeah, I hope we've kind of shared some of those with the people who'll be listening to this thing. Nice one, man.
I think so. And yeah, well, to everybody out there that took the time to check this out, Julian has actually written a number of books with your partner, Nikki Weird. And isn't it awesome that, like, we've both written books on this stuff and we didn't really talk about them at all? Because that's like, yeah, just because we're not trying to do the same old interview with the Psanctum Oddcast. We're trying to, really just dig in and talk and, have conversations about psychedelics and history and magic and anthropology and whatever comes to mind, and postmodernism if that comes up, and, just that kind of stuff. But yeah, if you want to take us out, Julian.
Tom, it's delightful to see you, man. It's really, really lovely to connect with you in this way at what is a very challenging time for a lot of people, where people are getting an opportunity, some of them, to be very inward and be reflecting on things. And so, hopefully good will come from that. And hopefully those of us who are perhaps in that situation can be working on our practice, can be doing whatever kind of refinement we're able to do, because that we also know that there's going to be there is a necessity for a lot of kind of healing, not only from the coronavirus, but from all of the stuff that is emerging in our culture now. And you and I both know that there are magical techniques, there are magical medicines out there which can help the wider community in just the same way that they've helped us. So let's keep working, keep praying at that altar, and in time, hopefully, we'll be able to share some of that more widely, and that our community can transform itself in a really good way.
Absolutely. And yes, I agree to everybody out there listening. There are magical techniques, there are magical medicines, and if you have any questions about them, you could always get in touch with me at psanctum.org. That's psanctum.org, home of the Psanctum Psychedelic Library, which will soon be the largest online repository of psychedelic literature from at this point, we're going to have some stuff from the Renaissance in there, all the way up to the modern day, and even in ancient history as well. So check it out. Julian, do you have any websites, social media, anything you'd like to promote for yourself?
I mean, probably the easiest way for people to get hold of me is the Blog of Baphomet.com, which is the blog that I've been running since 2011, I think it was, something of this order. And there's like a whole bunch of links there to like some of the online teaching that I do, and various other kind of pieces of work. You can find a lot of my content online. It will turn up in the first few bits of the Google search. What I would say to people at the moment, if they want to kind of have something that is hopefully inspirational, magical, and also fun, would be to check out the My Magical Things series. And I will be coming back to you at some stage, Tom, so that we can talk about another one of your magical things. Maybe we'll do the Amanita, but maybe there's something else we can pick up.
Oh, there's a lot.
Yeah, check that on my YouTube channel.
Yeah, awesome. And that's youtube.com/mymagicalthings.
I think it's like Deep Magic Begins Here. So Deep Magic is one of the names that I often use, but we can put a bunch of links in the description.
Yeah, I was going to say, send me the links and I'll put them all in the description. So anything we talked about, if you guys want to check it out there, they'll be in the description box below. Julian, thanks so much. I knew this was going to be great talking to you, and I look forward to doing it again, and I look forward to being on the My Magical Things podcast. So
Nice.
let's, and peace out all.